Do you have any advice so that I can better understand my partner? Yes. Ask them. There's not a lot of specifics on this one, so I don't know if there's like a specific thing around which we're trying to understand our partners. But in general, the best way to understand someone is to ask them about themselves and listen and believe them. If someone asks me about what it's like to be non-binary, I will tell them. I'll tell them different amounts of truth or different amounts of that story, depending upon how close our relationship is. But I'll tell them. If there's something in particular about your partner that you're not understanding, I think it can be helpful to go into it with curiosity and humility. I think a lot of times when there's something about our partners we don't understand, we can go into it with this kind of like reactive shame or guilt or fear. And that tends to make it really, really hard to actually have good conversations about whatever that thing is. Because then the conversation also already feels super fraught for the person you're trying to understand. So like I just talked about like with non-binary people or like with people who misgender me, right? Sometimes when someone misgenders me, after I point out my correct pronouns, they don't just say like, ooh, sorry, got it, and move on. They start like apologizing in like a really big way and talking about what a good person they are. At that point, our discussion about my pronouns becomes way more challenging to have in an actually effective, upfront, direct way, because a lot of that conversation has now been hijacked by their shame and guilt that they are feeling for having misgendered me, and by the ways in which that disagrees with their internal idea of who they are. And so what can happen is a conversation that could have been productive and helpful and clear instead becomes much more difficult to have at all because the other person is already so activated, so I can't be as upfront as I want to be about things. Sometimes when we're in a partnership, our partners are going to be just super different from us in ways that may even be fairly foundational, and we may not understand them. And so I think that asking open-ended questions, coming to it from this place of like genuine curiosity, of like humility that you don't know everything and you're not right, and like wanting to know and understand it from their perspective can be one of the best ways for us to get from them the information we need to understand them. Because if I approach someone with like, hey, you're super into this tabletop game that it doesn't make sense to me. Tell me what you love about it. Like, how did you get into it? What do you like about it? What's interesting to you about this? I think that gives them an opportunity to share what's special about something to them and how they think about it and where they come to it from in a way much more effectively than like, why are you into that? Like, it doesn't make sense to me. Like, that seems really boring. Because then they have to defend it. They have to come from this space of already feeling like judged or unseen or not understood. So find that humility, find that curiosity, and ask open-ended questions. And, treat them like an expert on whatever this thing is. If you don't understand why your partner never puts clothes in the laundry, that can be super frustrating for you. And if you come to them with that frustration, it's going to be harder to have a conversation about what's happening. And so I think coming to them with like, hey, I've noticed that like your clothes just kind of get left on the floor. We've talked about it a few times, but I've never really taken the time to like ask you like, how did that come to be? Like, was this just never a thing that was a priority for you? Like, what's going on there? Like, I try to make sure I put them in the laundry for my reasons, but it seems like you have something else that's happening for you that makes it less important to you, something you don't see as happening. So like, I just want to understand like what that is. What's this different perspective? What's this different set of experiences? How did you come to be in this position? Because if I understand that, then maybe we can find a solution that actually works for both of us, right? Maybe there's someone who, because of their ADHD, they just kind of like take a thing off and throw it and then it stops existing and they don't even notice it. And they've never gotten into the habit of putting things in the laundry. And so trying to create that new habit has a huge cost for them in terms of like initiation of that task. And so it's hard to get them even started on it. Maybe it's that the position of the laundry bin is just one that is like harder for them to access for whatever reason. And so they just kind of don't get there with their clothes, right? I think that if we come to things with giving people the benefit of the doubt, that whatever this thing is that we're trying to understand is something that they are doing for a reason that makes sense to them, and that is not like them purposely being terrible to us, we're much more likely to figure out what that is so we can understand what's going on. I think another place this often comes up is when you have people who grew up in significantly different ways, whether that's an interracial relationship, a relationship between people who had very different socioeconomic statuses growing up, a relationship between people who grew up of different religions or different like intensities of religious experience. There can be a lot of factors there that we just don't understand because the experience is so different from our own. And I think just acknowledging that if we're not understanding our partner, that is something that we need to approach with humility and with curiosity can make it much easier to understand that experience, particularly if there's some sort of power imbalance inherent in the thing we're not understanding, or particularly if it's a very conflictually laden topic. If I come into this with the assumption that this person's just wrong and I need to figure out why they're so wrong, it's going to be a tough conversation. Whereas if I come into it with, we do things really differently, I have a good reason for doing things my way, they probably have a good reason for doing things their way, I just want to know what that is. It's going to be much easier to help them explain that to us in a way we can understand. And I think that, just remember that like understanding is a thing that both people have to contribute to. If your partner isn't willing to communicate or talk about a thing, you're not going to be able to understand them. And if you're unwilling to hear what they're communicating and saying, you're also not going to understand them. So you need both. You need people who are communicating and people who are open to hearing. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. Understanding is a shared experience. It is something that requires the participation of both parties. And so just keep that in mind, that if understanding isn't happening, it might be on them, it might be on you, it might be on both of you. But like, look at how this is happening and whether we are creating an environment that is conducive to understanding or one that's not.